I think we're off to a good start in Pastoral Ministry 402. Welcome back to this narrated PowerPoint that talks about pastoral ministry in a crisis. Today you will learn the definition of the word crisis. You will learn how to distinguish between a loss, a crisis, and trauma. And then we will look at the 4 phases of a crisis. This last point will require much attention and the bulk of our time together today. How can we define the word crisis? Well, it's important for us to understand what the word means, because we'll not be able to understand how to minister in a crisis if we don't know what it is. Webster's defines a crisis as a crucial time, a turning point in the course of anything. The term is often used for a person's internal reaction to an external hazard that comes along. Now, the words stress, crisis are usually used interchangeably, but they're used incorrectly that way. As Dr. H. Norman Wright points out, we need to keep in mind that underlying a crisis is a loss of some kind. Therefore, a crisis and a loss will go hand in hand. But there's a difference between a crisis and a trauma, and we will come back to and discover what trauma really means in a later narrated PowerPoint. It's important for us to distinguish between a loss, a crisis, and trauma. A loss produces an ache, an emptiness. It's a sadness that we experience. We can lose a person to death, or we can lose something that's very valuable to us. Nevertheless, it would be described as a loss that brings emptiness, sadness, and ache. A crisis throws us off balance and into a state of shock, panic, and uncertainty. We don't know exactly which path to take or what to do. But a trauma is a wounding. It overshadows our senses and it rewires our brain. It causes our safe world to reach the point of feeling unsafe. We'll come back to at least trauma later on and talk about it in more detail. But for now, let's focus on crisis. In the graphic before you, you see the words crisis intervention. Notice that it is a roller coaster and each slump gets deeper. Often a person in a crisis can go from one deep slump, to another one rather quickly. That's the reason why it's very important for us not to have a waiting list when we're dealing with people in a crisis. It should be that we would see them as quickly as we possibly can. A person in a crisis must take precedence over a committee meeting, a luncheon engagement, or a golf match somewhere. Those must be interrupted. A crisis will be solved, but if you wait to see that person in a crisis, please don't wait more than one night. And if then, at least talk to the person briefly over the telephone to try to help them get through some of the ups and downs of their crisis. Now we're going to look at the phases of a crisis on the next several slides. Now let's examine the phases of a crisis. Phase 1 of a crisis is the impact phase. This is a phase that truly could be described as one that hits suddenly and stuns. A person is in shock in this phase. The individual usually hears only 5 to 8% of what he or she is being told. Your action should be to go and be with them. Don't worry so much about what you will say. The main thing is to be there. That's what they will remember, your presence in the crisis. Hold them, hug them, hold their hand. Get down on a knee and look them in the eye. Convey God's love and yours as well. Be seated beside the person or kneel before them. Don't take an authoritative stance. Offer any assistance, but don't start making decisions for them. They will become totally dependent upon you if you begin to take charge of decisions they will have to make later. Help them with any arrangements or needs. Maybe they will need someone to take care of them or their children. This phase will typically last 24 to 36 hours. Usually it's brief. but it can last for several days. Usually there are one of two responses that are possible. They will stay and deal with their crisis, that is, they'll fight, or they will run away from it. There'll be a flight away. If they run away from the crisis, it will only prolong the crisis and their ability to cope with it. When you run from it, it just postpones the resolution. Guilt may be in this phase. They will perhaps rationalize, or they will project blame, even on you as a caregiver. And so we need to recognize that we need to give them a sense of normalcy if we possibly can. It leaves a person numb and disoriented as well. Don't expect rational thinking at this time in their lives. The person can forget and they can wander mentally. They forget about what they're talking about and their subject may be somewhat skewed. There can be denial and a search for what has been lost. Do not give advice at this time. They won't hear it, it won't register, and they'll probably get angry with you. What you do is accept the person's loss. Draw out their feelings during this time by using questions. But mostly, just be there, just be present. Sometimes you don't have to say anything. They need your presence more than they need anything else. Words can be used sparingly, but it's okay not to say very much during this phrase. They will ask why, but this is not the time to give answers. Instead, give them permission to ask why. You know, I'd like to know why myself. I don't know why. Maybe one day both of us will know. If I had experienced this event, I would ask why also. What you're doing with those expressions is normalizing their feelings. Give them permission to vent what is inside of them. If you give them scripture passages, give them simple ones. They're not ready for deep theological statements or scripture passages. Give them passages that would give comfort, passages that would help reflect their emotion or anguish, but not an excessive study. Keep prayer simple. Avoid complex prayers. Just pray a prayer that would reflect their feelings back to God. For example, God, we're just coming apart. God, we know your comfort is there, but we don't feel it. The main thing is being there and asking God to provide help for them. Phase 1 is the impact stage. Now we come to phase number 2. It's the withdrawal and confusion stage. There is a tendency here to deny one's feelings. Now, I will remind you that these phases can overlap somewhat. But in this phase, a person moves into a time of emotions. The first 24 to 36 hours have passed, and many emotions are present. Anger, depression, ambiguity, uncertainty, all of these are a part of what's going on in the person's life at this moment in phase number 2. They don't know where to go. They may try to bargain with God or with other people. For example, they may say to the Lord, Lord, if I can keep my home together, I will pray every day. Or, honey, if you come back to me, I will be faithful. Or they can detach. They might say something like this, I don't want to go with her anymore. She has real problems. Or, it doesn't matter. They will start asking you what to do. Be very careful here to give them only task-oriented directions. Offer suggestions such as, when you had difficulties before, what were some of the things that helped? This will get them to think about previous crises they've gone through and how they have managed to cope in those cases. Or you might ask, what are some possibilities for you now in this situation? Something you need to be sure to do is throw away the clock during this phase. Do not limit the time you spend with an individual in a time of crisis. It may take some time. This is difficult. And then try to understand their feelings. Understand their lives have been disrupted and they're unable to cope. Here are some emotions and feelings that they're going to naturally go through. Bewilderment. I never felt this way before, you might hear them say. Or danger. They may say something like this: I feel scared. And it does seem like the world has turned dangerous to them. Or confusion. They might say, I can't think clearly. Or they've reached an impasse. It might be that they would express these words: I'm stuck. I can't get out of this impasse. Desperation may be another feeling that comes to their minds. I need to do something, but I don't know what to do at all. Or there may be apathy. Apathy would maybe be expressed by saying something like this: nothing can help me. Maybe helplessness. I can't cope with this alone. Or maybe urgency. I need help now. Or discomfort. I feel miserable and I'm very unhappy. What can you do to help them? Well, help them articulate their feelings. Help them express what they're feeling. Help them manage their painful feelings. Give them permission to share their feelings openly with you. And tell them it's natural to have certain kinds of feelings. Help them discover what their feelings mean to them. Understand the potential negative effects of their feelings. Deep, deep depression can be the result, or even suicidal thoughts. Find ways for the person to express their feelings. Avoid saying everything is going to be all right. You don't know that everything is going to be all right. Their crisis might lead to an even deeper hole. And so don't say everything's going to be all right. Now we come to phase number 3. It's the adjustment phase. This is a time of positive thoughts in the midst of all the negative thoughts that have bombarded the individuals up to this point. This is a time of hopefulness. This person is hopeful, but their hope has a tendency to fluctuate. They may have great hope one day, and the next day their hopes be dashed. Make sure you do not short-circuit the grieving process. That is a tendency that many ministers have, and that is to fix something and therefore short-circuit the grieving process. It takes time and hard work to go through grief, and we should never short-circuit that process. There needs to be a time of focused exploration, a time when the individual begins to gain spiritual insights. This phase can take many weeks. It can take many months. It really just kind of varies. During this period of time, you can ask questions, use Scripture, pray with the individual, use inspirational books, but be careful that you don't give them books that are not totally Christian and are not theologically accurate. Now we come to the last phase of a crisis. It's the sense of hope phase. It's the reconstruction phase. This phase will most likely take many months. It's a time when a sense of hope has returned to the person. They've been working on their problems. They've been working on their adjustment. They've gained new insights into themselves and into life. It's a time that they may reach that point of being reattached to something new. It's at this moment that people begin to reach out who have lost a spouse and begin to look for someone else to at least spend time with. There will be perhaps no romantic inclinations, but it will be a time to be with someone else and to share ideas and dreams and happiness and sadness with them. It's also a time when the person just begins to say, what should I do and how should I go forward next? During this time, I encourage you to reinforce the hope that they have. Encourage the progress that they're making. Talk with them about what they're learning and how they will handle the next crisis when it comes along. Now, just as a review, we've talked about phase number 1 of a crisis. That's the impact stage. It's a stage that will last usually 24 to 36 hours. It leaves a person stunned and numb and disoriented. We don't give advice during this time. We recognize that we will accept that person's loss as our greatest gift to them. They will ask the question why during this time. Give them simple scriptures, keep your prayers simple, and recognize that this time will then eventually lead to phase number 2. Phase number 2 is a time in which they just don't know what to do or where to go. They may bargain, or they may detach from culture. Give them task-oriented directions. Throw away your clock during this phase because they need you. Understand their feelings, and there may be a variety of those. Help them articulate their feelings and express them. Help them manage their painful feelings. Understand the potential negative effects of their feelings, depression or suicide. And if they express feelings of suicide, then be sure to direct them toward a source of help. Do an intervention. And then phase number 3 is the time when the individual begins to adjust. Make sure that you don't short-circuit the grieving process. Give them a time of focused exploration where they gain spiritual insight. And then phase number 4 is a sense of hope. This phase most likely will take months. It's a sense of hope that returns to them. They may be attached to something new. You should just encourage them with the progress that they have made, reinforce the hope that is within them, and help them to move forward. For indeed they will need all the experience that they have gained to deal with the next crisis they may face.